Hi everyone, thank you so much for attending my presentation. My name is Jenifer Yost and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Idaho down at the Twin Falls R&E Center, and I'm part of the Department of Soil and Water Systems. The project that I will be talking to you about today is in collaboration with the USDA Agricultural Research Service. And the title of my presentation is The Effects of Manure and Cover Crop on Soil Physical Properties on Aerosols down in southern Idaho. So to start, research has shown, and it's also kind of hypothesized still, that cover crops are able to help retain soil moisture. And this is because the cover crop is able to provide ground coverage because of the above ground biomass. And this ground coverage is able to decrease the amount of water that's being evaporated off of the soil surface, therefore allowing the soil to retain more moisture. There's also been research that has looked at manure applications to the soil surface, and usually when manure is applied, there have been increases in soil moisture. And this is just due to the increase in the organic matter and the organic carbon in the topsoil. Now, this hasn't been shown in all soil types, primarily in coarser, so very sandy soils, or in silty soils. But regardless, the cover crop and the manure application practices haven't really been evaluated down in southern Idaho and various in the semi-arid and irrigated crop production region. So the overall goal of the study was to determine if manure and or cover crops are able to increase the amount of water that is being held in the soil. And we did this at 2 long-term research study sites down in southern Idaho. We also were interested to see that if manure and or cover crops influenced the soil physical properties as a whole in these systems. So like I said, we were looking at 2 different study sites. The first one is cover crop. So both of the study sites were done at ARS's Northwest Irrigation and Soils Research Farm, and this is out in Kimberly, Idaho. The cover crop study was started in 2016. The cash crop that is used throughout the growing season is silage corn, and the cover crop is a winter forage species, which is triticale. So the triticale is planted right after harvesting the silage corn. And it grows throughout the season or throughout the winter, and then is harvested right before silage corn is planted the next year. So this study site was set up as a split plot design. So if you see the figure on the bottom left, we're able to see that there are 4 different blocks. So this is a split plot with 4 replicates. There are 2 main experimental treatments, and that is based on tillage. So we're considering the direct seeding to be a no-till system, while the chisel and disc plowed system is going to be the conventional tillage method. So you're able to see that in each block, 4 plots are going to be conventional till, the other 4 are going to be limited/no-till. And then within those, we have 4 different sub-treatments. 2 of them incorporate cover crop, either with or without dairy manure. And then the last 2 are going to be no cover crop with or without manure. So if you see M, it means that manure was applied. NM is going to be no manure. CC is cover crop. NCC is no cover crop. In the plots that didn't receive manure or have cover crops, it is considered to be air control. The second study site was also at the ARS Northwest Irrigation and Soils Research Farm in southern Idaho. So this is the long-term manure study. This one was set up slightly different. So this was a randomized complete block design. This one was started in 2013. And the crop rotation for this system is wheat to potato to barley to sugar beet. So for this year, when we collected our data from it, this was in year 8, so this is under sugar beet. And for here we have 8 different treatments. The first one is a control, so there was no dairy manure or fertilizer applied to that soil. There was a fertilizer only plot, and then we had 3 different amounts of dairy manure applied to the soil. We applied 10, 20, or 30 tons of manure per acre. And we did this on 3 of the treatments are on an annual basis, and 3 of them are biennial. So we had 4 replications of each of these different treatments. And we were really interested to see how much manure should be applied to these soils and how often it should be applied in order to see differences in the soil physical properties. So we collected measurements using 3 different instruments. So we collected bulk density from 0 to 2, 2 to 4, and 4 to 6 inches. And that was just using rings that you push into the soil that have a specific volume. We use a Cornell sprinkle infiltrometer to measure the runoff rate, the infiltration rate, and the amount of rainfall that is able to occur prior to the soils running off. Then we also measured saturated hydraulic conductivity out in the field using a Saturo. And this is just a picture of what the corn looked like about a week or so before we went out to measure, take these measurements. So for the cover crop site, we went out and took soil physical property measurements just before the corn started tasseling in some of the treatments. And then for the long-term manure, we sampled about a week or 2 prior to the sugar beets being under full canopy. So for both of them, it was mid-season. So the first set of data I'm going to share with you is bulk density. For cover crop, bulk density was significantly different between 0 and 2 inches. So that's the graph I'm going to be sharing with you right now. And for here, so you're going to see the bulk density on the y-axis, and that's measured in milligram or megagrams per meter cube, and the different treatments on the x-axis. So if you remember, M is going to be manured plots, NM is no manure, then CC is cover crop, and CC is no cover crop. So for here, in the top 2 inches of the soil, you're able to see that when manure is applied, the bulk density tends to be lower. And that's just because the bulk density tends to be lower when there is a lot more carbon being entered into the system. So just applying the manure is going to help decrease the density of the soil. And you're able to see that the no manure, no cover crop was significantly higher than the manured plots. And that's just because there's more than likely a decrease in the amount of organic carbon that's present in the soil. So for the long-term manure study, again, the treatment is on the x-axis, and the A is going to stand for when the manure is applied annually, and the B is when it's applied biannually. For here, the 0 to 2 and 2 to 4 inches for bulk density were not significant. We only saw differences between 4 and 6 inches. Again, this is a megagram per meter cube. And when you're looking at the graph, also, when you look at the graph, if you see letters that are the same between treatments, it means that they are not significantly different. And when you do see different letters, so just like, for example, the 30 tons applied annually is significantly different than when only 10 tons of manure is applied on an annual basis. And they also have different letters that signify that they're significantly different. So for here, you're able to see that a majority of the different treatments had approximately the same bulk density. It was only when the 30 tons of manure was applied on an annual basis that it was, you're able to see an increase in the organic matter, which is obviously decreasing the density of the soil. And when 10 tons of manure is applied either on an annual or biennial basis, that tended to have be significantly higher than the 30 tons applied annually. The next graph I'm going to show is the runoff rate. So this is the runoff rate in inches per hour for cover crop. You're able to see that there are no significant differences between the different treatments for runoff rate. So you can't exactly say if the manure or the cover crop plots are helping or decreasing the amount of water that's running off. The same thing was found for the long-term manure. So there were no significant differences for the runoff rate. And the variation, which is going to be the bars, is actually really high for these data sets. So unfortunately, even with the different treatments, the variation between the data points was still so great that there's really no difference when it comes to whether manure or cover crops are there. The runoff is going to be about the same. Now this is the infiltration rate, so the amount of water that's able to infiltrate through the soil. And for here, you're also able to see that even the infiltration rate didn't seem to matter. So there's actually less variation for cover crop. They were all about the same, and the errors were about the same. And same with the long-term manure. So at least when we collected these in the mid-season, it looks like that the infiltration rate didn't really make a difference based off of treatment. So now we're going to move into the amount of water the soil that is able to infiltrate through the soil prior to runoff. So for cover crop, and this is going to be measured in inches, for the cover crop site, you're able to see that the manure cover crop is able to accept a lot more water before it starts running off. So for here, those plots were able to infiltrate about 2.3 inches of water before runoff occurred. Where you're able to see, and this also suggests that it could just be that since the manure is there, it's able to retain more water. It also can possibly suggest that the cover crop is just taking water from the soils, so these soils are slightly drier. And you're also able to see that the manure cover crop is significantly higher than the no manure no cover crop sites, and that was only able to accept about 1.5 inches of water before runoff occurred. And for the long-term manure site, although when you look at kind of the average data from all the plots, it looks like there could be differences. Statistically, there was no difference based on the treatments. So for a year, it doesn't matter what treatment you're looking at, it's going to accept approximately the same amount of water before runoff starts to occur. The last graph I'm going to be showing you is the field saturated hydraulic conductivity. So this is also kind of a metric on the infiltration rate. So this is measured in inches of water per day. And for here, the error was just so great. There was no treatment effect whatsoever. So for here, you're able to see that all the error bars kind of overlap with one another. So when it comes to the saturated hydraulic conductivity of these soils, it doesn't seem to matter whether cover crops or manure are applied. They're just not significantly different from one another. And the same thing occurred for our long-term manure study. So it didn't matter how much manure and how often it was applied. Either way, the saturated hydraulic conductivity was the same for all of the treatments. So based on all of that information, We learned that the bulk density tends to be lower in the manure cover crop and the manure no cover crop. And that's just because of the increase in the organic matter that is in the topsoil. And the bulk density tended to be higher when no manure and no cover crops were in the plots. Bulk density was also lowest when 30 tons of manure was applied on an annual basis. For runoff weight rates and infiltration, treatment didn't influence those at all in the soils down in southern Idaho. We also found that more water is able to infiltrate through the soil prior to runoff when manure and cover crop is in the field or is applied. And that could just be because the manure is able to hold more water, or possibly that the cover crops are sealing water from the cash crops. While less water is able to infiltrate through the soil prior to runoff under a no manure, no cover crop system. And lastly, we found that treatment didn't influence the field saturated hydraulic conductivity. So that goes kind of along with the runoff and infiltration rates. Even though we have all of these different treatments, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're influence the soil physical properties. One last thing I would like to mention is, although we collected all this data, we also collected aggregate stability samples. We have not processed them yet, but we have high hopes that even though we didn't see a lot of differences in some of the soil physical properties that we've already analyzed, that we expect to see more treatment differences with manure and cover crops when it comes to the proportion of macro and micro aggregates and the aggregate stability. But that is something that we will be working on in winter. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions during the Q&A session. Thanks.